are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, your host and White House correspondent. I'm in touch, and so you be in touch. Follow me on all the social media platforms at Dr. Nii-Quartelai. All you got to do is type in Dr. Nii-Q, D-R-N-I-I-Q, and I pop right on up fresh for you to follow. Also, be sure to download the KBLA app to listen to us live or on demand, or simply tell Alexa to play KBLA Talk 1580 because we're fancy like that. Last but certainly not least, subscribe to A More Perfect Union podcast. That way you'll never miss an episode. We are live in afternoon drive time from coast to coast. I'm joining you from Washington, D.C. today, where earlier today I was in that White House press briefing room. Got the last question in, the White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, an issue that is absolutely front of mind for a number of people across the nation, particularly in Los Angeles, where our home station is located. I'll get to that in just a moment. But right now, social media, everybody is talking about what's happening in Washington, D.C., wondering if this just might happen, or some version of this, in their city or a city near you. And so first things first, we want to make sure that all of our leaders, learners, and listeners stay safe. According to Democracy on the Go, here are just 5 things to know and do about the National Guard being deployed to Washington, D.C. Number 1, know that this is another manufactured crisis. All right, let's be clear about that. Crime is down in D.C., not up, but down. There's no need for military intervention, just like there was no need for an intervention in Los Angeles. Number 2, deploying the National Guard, it endangers both civilians and our military personnel. You know why? Well, while there's no violence warranting their deployment, this will escalate tensions and cause conflict. Number 3, this is going to waste money and resources. Money and resources that could be spent feeding the hungry. Imagine that. Providing medical services. Imagine that too. Improving schools, fixing roads, caring for veterans. You get my drift. And 4, call your elected officials. I always like to say, keep your elected officials' office number in your phone, so you don't have to, search for their number. You don't have to Google it. Call your elected officials and demand that they speak out against this gross misuse of taxpayer funds and military resources. And number 5, call this what it is: a distraction, an abuse of power, and then continue to focus on the things that matter, like releasing the Epstein files, demanding a ceasefire and increased aid to Gaza, supporting Texas Democrats, and protecting immigrants. This message is brought to you by Democracy on the Go. Now it's time for your national news roundup. It's time for you to decide the good, bad, and ugly headlines of the day. Kicking us off, Gothamist is reporting that Trump took over the D.C. police, but in New York City, you know what? A takeover would be harder. Well, at least that's what legal experts are saying. President Trump, of course, signaled on Monday that federal law enforcement could become more prominent in New York City as he moved to seize control of the Washington, D.C. Police Department and deploy the National Guard. But in Washington, a federal law that allows him to take control of the city police for 2 days in an emergency and for up to 30 days if he notifies certain members of Congress. But legal experts say that Trump may have a more difficult path if he attempts to exert federal control in cities other than Washington. The legal experts say that Trump could deploy the National Guard under specific circumstances, as he did during the immigration protests in L.A. earlier this year. During his first term, Trump also deployed federal agents to guard federal property and buildings during protests in cities like Portland, Oregon. But there's no clear legal path. There's no clear legal path for him to take over a police department like New York, which is not subject to the same federal control as Washington. Now, we know that there's been a lot of legal precedent that Trump and his administration have thumbed their noses at. And so, I get what the legal experts are saying, but we are in uncharted waters when it comes to a lot of legal precedent. And so we're going to keep our eye on that as this story unfolds over the course of the next 30 days or so. But in other news, the Associated Press is reporting that Sherrod Brown, Ohio's highest profile Democrat, is expected to seek a return to the U.S. Senate in 2026. That's right. The former senator is expected to make another run for the U.S. Senate next year, giving Democrats a likely boost as they wage an uphill fight to win control of the chamber. Brown is yet to make a formal announcement, but people familiar with his plans were not, they weren't authorized to speak, but one said an announcement could come by the end of next week. The decision was first reported by Cleveland.com. Brown, 72, seeks the Senate seat currently held by Republican U.S. Senator John Husted, who's 57, a former Ohio lieutenant governor, state senator, and secretary of state who was endorsed by President Trump. Now, look, Sherrod Brown has served this country for a very long time. This is my only worry about this. He's 72. The current Republican senator is 57. I used to work for the AARP, so you will never hear me say anything that is outright ageist. I have a sensitivity to those things, but I do think that Democrats struggle with passing the torch to the next generation, and I find it very hard to believe that Senator Brown may be Democrats' best chance in Ohio of winning that Senate seat. He's 72, y'all. 72. They serve 6-year terms. So by the end of his next term, he will be 78. And if he runs again, he will be 80 some odd years old. I'm telling you, Democrats better learn this lesson. When we come forward, I'm looking forward to switching gears and being in conversation with the author of Don't Talk About Politics, Sarah Stein Lubrano. She joins me, and her book is really interesting. I think it's actually pretty timely. She argues that democracy is in crisis because we're clinging to the myth that talking about politics changes people's minds. She presents an alternative way to affect the political landscape, and I want to hear all about it. I have a feeling you want to hear all about it too. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. Sarah Stein Lubrano when we come forward. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai, and I'm really delighted to welcome to the show Dr. Sarah Stein Lubrano. She holds a PhD from the University of Oxford and a master's from the University of Cambridge. She's the author of this really intriguing new book, Don't Talk About Politics. It argues that democracy is in crisis, don't we know it, because we are clinging to the myth that talking about politics changes people's mind. She presents an alternative way to affect the political landscape. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I know it is late on the French countryside. You're normally in London, but we're so glad that you are up very, very, very early to have this very important conversation. Right now, it seems like we can't help ourselves. We are talking about politics nonstop here in the U.S., in part because we have a very unconventional president. Dare I say, a president that has authoritarian tendencies.
Yep.
And that's putting it lightly. And it is affecting real people in loads of different ways. And so talk to us about how some of the recent news coming out of the nation's capital here in the United States, how is it playing where you're at in France?
Honestly, we obviously get the news a little bit less. So I get notifications all day on my phone because I'm an American and I'm devastated. But it trickles through, let's say, not because it isn't important or it doesn't affect people in Europe, but because it isn't quite the same central force. And also some of it is a little bit unintelligible if you're not used to the signifiers. You know, I grew up right outside of DC. So the idea that this is happening in DC right now, where my sister lives, where my parents live, is shocking. But it might not quite, it might take a moment for people to think about what that means in other countries. Yes, and I think it's also worth saying that there is a strong reaction against Trump. Unfortunately, there are also sympathizers in England and elsewhere, but you can see many people who do not want to be associated with him, even people that we would consider centrists or moderates, because they see the authoritarianism and its obviousness in a way the more you are removed from it in some sense.
And so let's talk about your book, because on its face, particularly in a place like Washington, D.C., the title says, "Don't talk about politics."
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, look, this is a book that is a pushback against a very particular kind of what I would say is a liberal culture. But I don't mean liberal in the sense of the left half of the American Overton window. I mean liberal in the sense of a culture of politics that we built through the Enlightenment era in Westernish democracies. And there are many beautiful things about this tradition of liberalism. There is a certain kind of emphasis on the idea that individuals have rights that are not alienable by governments, right? I like that. There's the idea that, you know, religion should not interfere with the state. I like that. But there are also other aspects of liberalism, both materially, let's say, and also culturally, that are problematic. Many of us are not persuaded, let's say, by the idea that private property is necessary for personal rights, especially certain kinds of private property, but also, and importantly, there's a culture in liberalism that has to do with the idea that the way that ideas win is that we talk about them a lot, right? And so we debate ideas and we leave them up for debate, and then we have a marketplace of ideas. And just like the supposed brilliance of capitalism, where the best product will win out in the long run, the best idea will win out in the long run, as though ideas were the same thing as, I don't know, the newest model of phone or something like that, right? And there are a couple of reasons that this is a problem, but the most important one is that it doesn't work. And one of the very first things I do in my book is I look at all the evidence for whether, for example, people who watch televised debates change their minds at all, really, when they watch those debates. And this might be shocking to think about as Americans, because we just watched this nuts debate, right, with Trump and Biden. But actually, there's not a particularly sizable effect in the long run that debate had. And more broadly, when you do something that social scientists do, where you look at huge amounts of data over long periods of time in many countries around the world, we see that these televised debates appear to have had no effect on public opinion, and especially voting intention. And that's true even for undecided voters. So what that suggests is that just listening to arguments, and even to some degree having arguments, I put some evidence for this in my book as well, does not change people's minds. It does not have an important effect on what happens politically. And there are a lot of good reasons for that, but there are some particularly core psychological aspects of the way human beings think about politics that mean that just arguing with one another is not likely to get us anywhere. So to go back to the title of the book, The point isn't that we should never use words to discuss politics with one another, because you and I are doing that right now. Mm-hmm. But the point is that if you really care about an idea like justice or equality or, racial equality or not having Trump in office, then the way to love that idea is to go live it in the world. And that means you don't just talk about things, and you certainly don't debate them, you organize. And then I talk for the rest of the book about how to do that.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying talk is cheap. Basically,
and it's also a distraction.
Talk is cheap, whether we're talking about the kind of talk that we see on a debate stage or just sort of the everyday chatter about politics. Chances are that singularly is not going to change behavior. But it sounds to me that you're advocating for more of a surround sound effect, where principally it's the organizing work, it's the action that really gets people to begin to re-examine their assumptions. And it's that really moves, public perceptions as opposed to just talk. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah. And I'll give two examples of things that are important, right? So I have a chapter in 2 chapters, one for each of the 2 things that are most effective when you look at big bodies of sociological research and psychological research about political change. One of them is our relationships with other people. We have a lot of good evidence that people do change their political beliefs over time in a meaningful way when they are, let's say, brought into a series of relationships with other people where they are positioned as equals and they have shared goals. For example, bizarrely in a way, given that I don't really like the US military as an institution and what it gets up to a lot of the time, the US military desegregating had a big effect on racism within its own employees. So when they desegregated and they brought units together, black and white and other racial groups, the white people in those units became less racist in a measurable way. And a lot of institutions can do this. Universities can do this if they set it up right. Just being exposed to people as equals and becoming friends with them over time breaks down various forms of prejudice. That's very important. So one of the things I talk about in the book is building spaces in our world where that happens, where we are positioned as equals with people that we have shared goals with but are different from in key ways, right? And we are actually lacking the kind of social spaces and areas where we can do this more than ever before in a lot of ways. We see the shrinking of green spaces every year. We see the shrinking of other kinds of social spaces. So one of the core things we have to do is build them back. And that's especially important in America right now, given what's going on. And then the other thing is what I tend to call gateway actions, which are small political acts that lead people to be able to open up their minds again and rethink an issue. Like, if they don't like migrants, you might ask them, okay, well, let's just get some of your used clothes. We're going to donate them. Some of the people we're donating to are migrants. Actually, you can come with me. We're going to donate them. Do you want to come with me? Right? That's a gateway action. It might not matter that much for the particular person that receives the sweatshirt. It matters a lot for the person giving the sweatshirt because now they have an action they've taken that allows them to think, maybe I could think about this differently. Right? So yes, there are these core actions and relationships, and they are what really matters, not words, because as you say, talk is cheap.
Talk is cheap. It sure is. I'm really fascinated with the idea of these gateway actions. Every episode of the show, I wrap it up by reminding people to not panic, but organize. Do what you can from where you are with what you have. And I think sometimes folks allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. They think if I can't, save a whole community, or if I can't have, the deepest possible impact with a singular action, then it's not worth doing. It seems to me that some of the research that you found that we can read about in your new book, Don't Talk About Politics, sort of throws cold water on that idea. You're saying that these small everyday actions, these gateway actions, can actually have a profound effect.
Yes, and sometimes in counterintuitive ways. So again, it's not that important to a degree whether, somebody donates their clothes, although hopefully it will go somewhere good. But it's very important that they begin to be brought into a world where they see that, migrants are also people. They're often very hardworking. They're here because we need them for our economy in many cases. And a lot of the time, the small actions lead to bigger and bigger actions. And that's what we should be aiming for ourselves, but also for people around us. It's like an invitation, to join a whole community that they're going to be in forever. And that matters. And much matters a lot more than words. So I would almost say like performative actions are not performative. Performative words are kind of always performative.
Mm-hmm. So my question then is, let's test your theory out, on some of the thorny issues. We know that in the most recent presidential election in 2024 here in the United States, that, issues around the rights of transgender people, the issues around racial justice, around reproductive justice, were some of the issues that animated voters the most, at least according to exit polls. Are gateway actions effective even with those thorny issues, or do they only work for sort of a subset of issues?
I think the transgender liberation movement has actually done a lot of work in this area, and they're doing a good job. Not that we're unfortunately seeing all the results of that right now that we would like, but they invented, well, the LGBTQ movement more generally have been at the forefront of developing a technique I talk about in the book called deep canvassing, where you talk to people who are kind of in a liminal state in terms of what they believe, and you share your experiences with them and you build a relationship with them. And this does appear to change people's minds in a significant way. So I would say it's not, in that particular instance, we might say that gateway actions are not the primary way that we might want to look at that problem, but instead we want to look at building relationships across difference in the way that is outlined in the deep canvassing technique, so that people will begin to see trans people as real people who are actually in their community and they know. And I think that is still doable. Even in this dark time, we can still do things like that. So yeah, I'd start there.
I mean, and that's part of the reason on this show, we like to talk to a whole wide range of people on the front lines. You know, we've had, you know, trans leaders and racial justice leaders and reproductive justice leaders. You know, we span the gamut. We've had conservatives that have been guests on the show. And it's been delightful to hear folks say, you know what, I may not agree with everything that they said, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. And there was this one thing that they did say where I was actually surprised to agree with them. And so we're going to dig into this even more when we come forward more with author Sarah Stein Lubrano. She's author of this new book that folks are buzzing about, as they should be buzzing about. It's called Don't Talk About Politics. And particularly in this fraught time that we are living in, I think this book offers us some perspective that I find to be sobering and empowering, and may in fact help us to get to the other side of whatever this is that we're experiencing. More with Sarah Stein Lubrano when we come forward. You're listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte, and really delighted that our special guest this hour is joining me from across the pond. She is up very late at night in France because we couldn't wait to have this conversation about her new book, Don't Talk About Politics. Author Sarah Stein Lubrano is with us, and she's talking to us about this book that really is a paradigm shift. I think for so many of us, particularly those of us that toggle back and forth between DC and other places, you know, we oftentimes, you know, talk about politics almost nonstop. And part of what Sarah is saying, based on research, is that basically, this is me editorializing, talk is cheap, right? That there are a number of gateway actions that we can all take. There's deep canvassing. There's relational organizing that we can do that's actually more effective than just talk, right? And so I just think that it's a simple message, but I think it's an important message because I think with the advent of social media as we know it, I think a lot of folks think that, okay, if I just put up a social media post and if I can make it go viral and I get the likes and the views, right, that will do the trick and inspire people to take an action. Sarah, what do you say?
Well, it's funny because I have actually started posting on social media recently because of the book, and posts have gone viral. Some of them have gone really viral, which is wild. And that's great. And it has nothing to do with persuasion, right? And I think that's a very different way of understanding social media. But I'm going to take you back to protests for a second, weirdly, because I think they're quite similar. So I also look at protests in the book. By protest, in this case, I mean demonstrations. So I don't mean boycotts. I don't mean strikes. I don't mean other forms of resistance where you are doing something material towards the people in power. You're just showing up and being loud, right? And a perhaps slightly unpleasant thing to say, given that I've been to many protests and demonstrations, is that they are not effective in the way people often imagine. We do not have evidence that demonstrations on their own change people's minds, in the long run especially, and we do not have evidence that they change the government. And one of the few exceptions for a while was the Black Lives Matter movement. So the Black Lives Matter movement did seem to change public opinion for a little bit. But unfortunately, right now, public opinion on the issues that movement was involved in is back down to about the same percentage of the American population as before. It did not make a long-term impact on public opinion, which is really painful. However, there is one thing that does happen when people protest. There's one small group of people that are changed for life, and their views are changed for life, and those are the protesters. People who get involved in protest movements, their minds change, which makes sense because they are brought into a network of relationships and actions that restructure their whole lives. And actually, there are all kinds of funny effects on protesters in the long run. Like they become more likely to get divorced, but they also get happier and more well, and they go back to graduate school, which is a bad idea. But anyway, so the point is, and this is what I say to the students in my activism workshops and trainings, is that protest is great for one thing, basically, which is recruitment and retention. It's there, so you bring people in and you give them basically a big warm hug and you say, we're all here together and we're doing this together, and there are other people like you. Same, you could think about same for Palestine solidarity or, you know, a number of other issues. I'm not saying never do a protest, but I am saying know what it's for and know what it's good for. And I personally see social media as about the same thing. I am never posting for people that are going to wildly disagree for me, because we know from all the evidence we have, that's not how people get persuaded. I'm posting for people who might need the articulation of a concept. They might need encouragement. They might need to feel like there are other people who believe the same thing as them. They might need to bond over this very difficult thing that, frankly, like at least half of Americans are going through in some way, but it's not for persuasion. And I see protests and social media as very similar in that regard. It's okay to do things, but it's important to know what they're for. That's strategy.
I really appreciate you making that point. I mean, you know, I post on social media as well, and you know, I am not interested in getting into a back and forth on social media with people, right? If we want to have a discussion, like let's take it offline, let's do that. But for folks who have the energy to go back and forth, you know, for hours, sometimes days at a time, it's like I got too many other things to do than to just do that. But it also sounds like, based upon your research, that may not be the forum, you know, to persuade people, right? Folks are fairly dug in on social media, and again, back to action, right? It's actions that speak louder than words. But again, when it comes to protests, as you've noted, you know, protests are more effective for the protester than everybody else, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's just saying, hey, folks, realize how to use these tactics in order to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. That seems to be the premise of your book, no?
Yeah, exactly. It's about tactics and strategy. And, you know, one of the things that is difficult about the last couple of decades, but especially the last two, let's say, is that with the rise of social media, people actually attend protests pretty regularly, and they attend them in huge masses, right? They attended like the Iraq War protests, and, you know, obviously Black Lives Matter was huge. And that's made easier by the internet and by the fact that we can see, oh, someone I hardly even know is going to this protest. But here's the issue. If you go to the protest because someone you hardly ever talk to actually posted about it, and you say, that's a great idea, and then you go, you're also going without a lot of strong social bonds to tie you in. And you might well go for once and feel good about yourself and post like, look, I'm at the, you know, No Kings, whatever protest.
Mm-hmm.
And but no one is calling you up on the phone to say, hey, I'm going to the next one, you're coming with me. And maybe even if that's happening, there's just not enough of those calls over time. And so people fade out of these movements as well. And so what I tell my movement, you know, students is, okay, well, like, have a protest and then get people to do something big and bring them into your world, and they become part of your life. You know, it's not a one-time thing. And that's what the protest is for. You have to start collecting people's information and bring them in and get them to do something else.
I want to ask you about debate culture, because in your book, you know, you make a very compelling, extremely well-researched case for ending debate culture and instead learning how to engage with new audiences with open minds and open hearts. I want to give you a chance to clarify, what do you mean by that? Because I think, again, a lot of folks out there might be thinking that we need more conversations. We need more debate, dare I say civil debate, with one another across party lines, across racial lines, across gender lines. You get my drift? Sure. What do you mean by ending debate culture?
Right. So I would say that a debate is something where we're basically operating under the assumption that ideas are going to fight each other, and then naturally the best idea will win. And we just do not see that in any of the empirical literature, but also in a way you can kind of reverse this logic, right? And say, okay, well, let's assume that that works. The people, if they just argue with each other enough, the best idea will win in the long run, and that happens most of the time. Then we have to assume that the best ideas have won, and we're living in the world of the best ideas right now. And I don't know about you, but I don't think that's true. I don't think the guys in the White House had the best ideas, and I don't think they debated them the best either, right? Also, we don't see people changing their minds, and that's important. But what I mean here is, I actually use this term in the book. I talk about, basically it's discourse as war. It's the idea that ideas just fight each other, and I'm tearing your argument apart, and you're tearing my argument apart. And if my argument is stronger, it's going to win. That's a very specific form of discourse. Whereas people can have disagreements, and if they have long-form conversations about it, where they tell each other stories about their lives and they get invested in each other's lives and willing to show up for each other anyway, even if it's hard and even if they disagree, that's something very different. And I think within, minority communities, for example, some of that actually remains. So I think about being Jewish in America, and we're having not a fun moment being Jewish in America right now because of Gaza. I promise you, as a left-wing Jew, it's not fun. But sometimes you are in community spaces where you say, you know what, we are going to show up for each other until we die. And we also disagree. And then you're having a conversation that is more than a debate, because you're not just fighting the two ideas against each other. You're saying, hey, we're in this together. Let's have a conversation. Let's see where we can go.
So, Sarah, in our remaining minutes with you, I want to ask you about just sort of the state of the Democratic Party in the United States. There are a number of folks who would say that the Democrats are in the political wilderness. There are reports that the Democrats have an approval rating of about 32% in the United States currently. And there are a lot of folks that don't see a clear leader of the Democratic Party. What advice, what guidance, based upon your research, would you offer to leaders of the Democratic Party in the U.S. That may be experiencing some difficulty in terms of building any consensus on a direction forward?
Yeah, this is a really hard question. So I'm just going to give a couple of things because it's such a big heart. But I agree. I'm not inspired, and I'm not persuaded most of the time by anything the Democratic Party is doing. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There's a gerontocracy. There's lots of things going on. But I would say, I think, one of the things that you have to offer people is actions they can undertake as part of being a member or a voter for the Democratic Party. And right now, I don't see a lot of organizing like that. But you can see some people who do a bit of this, like Mamdani, right? When he says, "Oh, we're going to go on a walk through all of New York." Cool. I mean, that's in some ways performative, but also people are now getting involved. They're going to meet other people on that walk, etc. Right? And the other thing I think you need to offer is a vision of something that will immediately get better about your life. This is why affordability is a good way of talking. Now, we can have critiques of Mamdani's actual policies, whether they're possible. And, I have lots of ideas about how I actually think grocery stores should work because I'm in a food co-op and I think it works better. Fine, whatever. But if you're trying to offer somebody a vision of a better life, you should be able to offer them immediately a sense of like, this is how things could get better for you. And I'm really invested in that. And that's partially because of the way our brains work. They're very attuned to action possibilities. They're very interested in what can I do and how can I have agency? And I think right now, a lot of political messaging across the aisle, across the spectrum, actually, but specifically right now with the Democratic Party is a bit agency denying for people and tells them there's nothing you can do. And nothing is going to get better. And the left is particularly bad at this. We have to find another way of telling people, no, there's stuff we can do. And you can start now.
I really appreciate all of your insights. I think for all my students at Pepperdine that are listening, know that this book's going to end up on your core syllabus this semester.
I love that.
It is so good. It is so timely for leaders on the front lines, for anybody out there that's trying to figure out how can we break through the noise? How can we have any sort of breakthrough with folks that may or may not believe in the future that we believe in? I think this book offers us a really, really good start towards tracking in a different direction. I want to encourage folks to go out and pick it up. It is available now. Again, it's called Don't Talk About Politics. And its author, Dr. Sarah Stein Lubrano, has graced us with her wisdom, her insights, her presence, all the way from France at this hour. We thank you for your work. And we can't wait to have you back again soon.
I would love to come back. Thank you so much for having me and for reading.
You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580, the quiet part out loud when we come forward. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai. And so many of you know that I am multi-hyphenated. I literally have a hyphen in my name, but I wear a hat as a journalist, as a professor, and so many of you also know me as an author, the author of Kamala, The Motherland, and Me, the best-selling book about my journey to Africa with former Vice President Kamala Harris. It is a timeless story, and if you haven't picked it up, go out and pick it up. But aside from being the author of that work, I really enjoy celebrating the work of other authors and digging into the work of other authors, hence why we just had an author on our show this hour. But I also want to lift up the folks that make getting books by Black authors, making them more available and not less, particularly in a time like this. And so a big shout out to the National Association of Black Bookstores. They have launched, and here's everything you need to know about this group, as reported by Blavity.com, a group of trailblazers who own some of the most historic Black bookstores in the country have come together to launch the National Association of Black Bookstores. In a statement released recently, the group said that the National Association of Black Bookstores is a nonprofit organization created to promote literacy, to amplify Black voices, and preserve Black culture. The founding members include Marshall's Music and Books in Jackson, Mississippi. Hey, Jackson, Mississippi. Hakeem's Bookstore in Philadelphia. Hey, Hakeem Bookstore. Marcus Books in Oakland, California. I know Marcus Books very well. What's up, Marcus Books? And Source Booksellers in Detroit. Blanche Richardson, the owner of Marcus Books, said the idea for a national bookstore association has been discussed for years and has finally come into fruition. Kevin Johnson, another one of the founders, said that it's a deeply personal project for him. He said, quotes, his mother Rose, founded and ran Underground Books in Oak Park. And for him, he says it's a way to honor her legacy and ensure that the stories and the voices and spaces that she cherished continue to thrive. And so you might wonder, what's the goal of the National Association of Black Bookstores? Well, the founders say that the nonprofit will unify, elevate, and empower Black-owned bookstores across the nation. Part of the goal, they said, is to create a long-term infrastructure for Black bookstores, which represents one of the most vital cultural cornerstones of Black America. This is music to my ears because so often on the show, when we talk about some of the great work that's happening, some of the content that folks are creating, for example, that's all great. But I think we also need infrastructure. We need new infrastructure that meets both the offline and online demands for commerce, for news and information that people can trust. And so I was delighted to see that this is really one of their goals, to create that long-term infrastructure that we're going to need to power us well into the future. The founders said that the organization will also offer professional resources. It'll support long-term financial sustainability and promote public engagement, and also educate people about the legacy of Black bookstores. We love all of this. Double click on all of this. The group plans to meet virtually and in person throughout the year, and some of the upcoming events include Black Lit Weekend in New York. That is happening this coming weekend, August 15th through the 16th. And then the Sacramento Black Book Fair is happening September 12th through the 13th. And so hat tip to all the Black-owned bookstores across the country that will make it their business to be a part of this National Association of Black Bookstores. And again, hat tip to some of the founding members of the National Association of Black Bookstores. Again, Marcus Books, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so, there are plenty of memories I have of, mom and dad and family and friends going to hear such and such author speak at Marcus Bookstores, or just making a stop at Marcus Bookstore while in Oakland. And the legacy continues in this very, very, very special way. And so our thanks to Blavity for reporting on this. Our thanks and congratulations to the National Association of Black Bookstores. Sign us up. Sign us up. We are here to support and amplify this extraordinary work. When we come forward in our second hour, we'll be joined by Desiree Cormier-Smith. She's a former special representative for racial justice at the U.S. State Department. She's also the founder of an organization that is really raising the bar when it comes to diplomacy and justice. There are so many trending headlines that matter to our community, that are essential if we're about the business of building a more perfect union. In our second hour, you don't want to miss Desiree Cormier-Smith. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580. More when we come forward.